Hey everybody, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org. They've got a brand new website with new and improved access to more than 20 years worth of essays promoting the cause of liberty. And FFF's writers, including Jacob Hornberger, Jim Bovard, Sheldon Richmond, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and more, aren't just good. They're the best at opposing and discrediting our corrupt overlords in Washington and their warfare, welfare, regulatory police state. That's the Future Freedom Foundation's new and improved site at fff.org. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. Our next guest is Adam Morrow from Interpress Service. Hey, Adam. How you doing?
I'm good, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Welcome back to the show. Everybody, Adam is live on the phone from Cairo right now. And according to all the papers, at least on their internet website versions, all hell is breaking loose in Egypt. Please give us an update of what's going on over there.
Sure. Well, all of this basically follows on the second anniversary of the Tahrir Square uprising, the January 25th revolution that saw the ouster of Hosni Mubarak. So Egypt just celebrated the 2-year anniversary of that uprising, and it's been accompanied by massive anti-government demonstrations that were held in Cairo and in Alexandria and several provinces around the country, which eventually led later in the day to clashes with security forces, which went on for a couple of days, and which in some places are still continuing until now, and which has basically put the scene in return Egypt back into a semi-state of chaos. The latest development on Sunday night was President Mohamed Morsi issued a decision basically declaring a state of emergency in the 3 cities of Egypt's Suez Canal, which are the city of Suez, Port Said, and in Ismailia, all of which are now in a state of emergency, which includes also nighttime curfews from, I believe, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. So there have been considerable developments in the last couple of days, and I think the death toll countrywide now stands at more than somewhere between 50 and 60.
Wow. All right. So now the background of this, I guess I'll oversimplify it real good and then you straighten us out. But basically, the forces that combined to overthrow Mubarak's dictatorship and even to marginalize the army out of some of their domestic power anyway, was a combination of the liberals and the Muslim Brotherhood. The liberals, who are very opposed to Mubarak anyway, and the Muslim Brotherhood, who are the most organized so-called civil society type group outside of the state itself. And they were the only ones really, as we talked about at the time 2 years ago, they were the only ones really prepared to take any power and that have any real widespread grassroots support, right? So then they won, but now the liberals are really angry and feel like they don't have a stake in the new system at all. And so rather than trying to participate within the new constitutional system, they're rebelling against it and saying the whole thing's a sham and trying to do a re-revolution and get a much larger stake. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good way of summing things up. I mean, they're basically saying this is sort of a second revolution. This is the liberals and the sort of the secularists that didn't really gain anything, that performed very poorly in parliamentary elections and whose candidates lost in presidential elections. So they're calling it a second revolution, a revolution part 2 sort of thing. Whereas the Islamists, who are led up mainly by the Muslim Brotherhood, are calling it a straight up counter-revolution, and saying that the elements of the former regime are deeply involved, that it's being pre-planned by elements of the deep state that still exists from that still is held over from 30 years of Mubarak's rule, that's still deeply entrenched through many state institutions. That basically 2 years has passed, the January 25th revolution of 2011. They've kind of and this is kind of they've finally gotten their acts together, and now they're sort of the deep state is sort of pushing back again now to undo what everything that's been done over the last 2 years.
Do you believe that, or is that just the regime's pathetic excuse, or what?
No, I think there's quite a lot of it to support it. I think there's a lot to support it because you're seeing incidents of violence that really aren't, in character for, members of Mohamed Baradei's Constitution Party, for example, or these liberal groups or these secular groups, aren't really characterized by employing violence. I mean, that's very much something that's associated with the former regime. And
but who's suffering the most? Is the Morsi regime, or are the liberal protesters suffering the most from, the reputation-wise, political power-wise, from the violence?
Well, you have the situation now where, these hardcore demonstrations are being incited. You've got people marching on state institutions and that sort of thing. And you've got the security services who are sort of caught in the middle between, this mandate of protecting, this mandate to protect vital state institutions and to sort of protect the sovereignty of the state. And also, but at the same time don't want to be accused of repeating Mubarak-era tactics, Mubarak-era heavy-handedness against protesters and demonstrators. So they're sort of caught in this situation where, protesters will push and push with increasing ferocity, and then if they're met with any level of violence, everybody will immediately jump on the Morsi administration and say, oh, look, they're resorting to the same old tactics that Mubarak used to do by shooting protesters and that sort of thing. And also, it also has to be mentioned also that the security services until now, and there are many of them, there are many different security services. The main one that's being employed now is the central security forces that are being used to combat demonstrations and to sort of, combat rioters and stuff like that, that these guys are not entirely loyal to Morsi. It's not like Morsi was elected 6 months ago and all of a sudden all of these security services immediately start implementing his directives, these guys are sort of, these guys were loyal to Mubarak for 30 years, and that legacy is still very much, it's still very much in evidence among those security services. So who these guys are actually answering to, it's hard to tell, because they're not, for example, police sort of refusing to redeploy in the streets. It's not like Morsi can just snap his fingers or wave a wand and all of a sudden all of these guys are, back on the streets doing their jobs. So it's hard to tell. If there's like a heavy-handed crackdown like there was, I think it was in Port Said, where 9 protesters were killed 2 or 3 days ago. That's the last thing that Morsi and his administration would want, so it begs the question whether these guys are actually like on his side and following his instructions, or whether they're making problems simply to discredit him. That's how complex the situation is now. People like to simplify it and make it like, oh, you've got, this new Morsi government on one side, and then you've got these, anti-government protesters on the other side, when it's actually much more complex than that, because you have these state institutions, including security services, whose loyalties really are not determinate yet. Do you know what I mean?
Well, sure, and, to my libertarian mind anyway, right down to each and every individual bureaucrat in the entire Egyptian state. Every judge, every secretary in their army, and I mean the secretary, not secretary of something. Every single one of them has their own interest in whatever outcome, so who knows?
Right. And I think a substantial majority of those actually do dream of a return of the Mubarak regime when they were looked after. I think a lot of people haven't sort of come to terms with the change, this massive change in leadership.
And now, hang on one second. Let me ask you this, because so if there's a deep state movement that wants to co-opt these demonstrations and use them as an excuse to sow chaos and weaken Morsi and the Brotherhood's regime, right. New regime, they still need these big liberal protests to hijack and provoke and take advantage of and create a crisis about. And that really seems to be, I think you said that I was more or less right, that the liberal groups, say the labor unions and whatever other socialists and academic types, I would imagine, that they feel like they don't have a stake in the government at all. That why would they acquiesce to so quote-unquote democratic system under this Constitution when this Constitution is written just to make sure that Morsi and the Brotherhood get their way from now on? That seems to be the way they feel about it. Is that a legitimate criticism?
Yeah, that's definitely a legitimate criticism. The Constitution is very much a big part of what's going on right now. That being said, it's important to note that I think just today, news just came out within the last couple of hours that a national dialogue that's being held between Morsi, not all of the opposition has answered his invitation to hold a dialogue. The National Salvation Front, which is the sort of most visible opposition bloc, and that includes Mohammed Baradei and Hamdin Sabahi and Amr Musa, who the latter two of whom were both presidential candidates that failed in the last election. That group, that bloc, that National Salvation Front, has refused to enter into any kind of dialogue. Is playing super hardball with the presidency and is saying, "Look, we're not going to enter into any talks until you answer our short list of demands and that sort of thing." Most of the opposition groups, however, have entered into these talks. It was just today. I think they held a session of talks today or yesterday. It's just come out today that the president has promised to create create some kind of new committee to discuss proposed constitutional amendments. So the issue of the Constitution and the contents of the new Constitution are still, it would appear, even though it was passed in a popular referendum last month, it looks like the contents of the referendum and so the contents of the Constitution and certain constitutional articles are still up for discussion.
Mm-hmm. And I guess he's really feeling the heat, and he really means it, you think, huh? He's going to go ahead and acquiesce some.
Yeah, and let's not forget also that the Constitution only passed with 64% approval. I had sort of thought it would go would get wider, get broader support, but that is also, I think that's indicative also of people's sort of disenchantment with the whole political process and how chaotic it's been over the last couple of months and the last year. And it saw a very, very low turnout rate. I think only 33% or something like that of the voting public actually participated in the constitutional referendum. So there is definitely disenchantment. He's definitely lost a bit of popularity. If not, not necessarily because of his particular policies, but just because of the chaos that's accompanied the whole political process for the last 6 months or so, ever since the presidential election.
Mm-hmm. Hey, tell me this, man. When you go grocery shopping in Cairo, what are the prices like these days?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think inflation has maybe, I'm not really an economist, but I think the inflation rate has sort of stabilized a little bit over the last couple of months, but that is within the context of a very slowly, steadily rising prices of basic commodities across the board. I don't know how much of that can be attributed to the global economic crisis. A lot of Egyptian cases like to blame on the global, and they might be justified in doing so on the global, global economic crisis, and how much of it has to do with, domestic problems is another issue. But it definitely is an issue. It's definitely an issue, and it's one of the things that people complain about. Why hasn't Morsi's been in power for 7 months now, and prices still we still have these same everyday problems. One of which is the steadily increasing prices of basic commodities, including strategic foodstuffs. So that is definitely that's definitely one ingredient of the sort of general malaise you hear now amongst the public.
It seemed like that had a lot to do with the revolution in the first place, that a lot of people who were really living on the margin, they saw the value of what little money they had, being inflated right out from under them, and it was sort of a bread riot along with, and we want fair trials too, as long as we're rioting.
Right. And if you've noticed also over the last maybe month or two, the Egyptian pound has also lost value against the U.S. dollar significantly. Yeah, I mean, not much. I think it went maybe from six Egyptian pounds to the U.S. dollar, and it went up to £6.50 to the U.S. dollar. So that's also affecting the economy in mostly negative ways. It does have certain positive effects as well, but it's been generally negative. The fact that the local currency is now worth slightly less than it was 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And also the latest round of violence, the latest round of clashes and whatnot the last couple of days has also just started to impact. I think it was yesterday, Sunday, was the first trading week on the stock exchange, and you're starting to see an impact as well on the stock exchange as well, where you've got investors starting to sell off because they're worried about Egypt's political future.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the Salafists and the Copts, and I would imagine pick your typical Western newspaper would probably tell you a scare story about the future of the Coptic Christians, for example, something like that. Can you give us an update about that?
Sure. That is a great question, and it should be taken with the understanding that the Western media does like to play up this issue a little bit. They know this is a sensationalist. They know that this is a sensationalist issue. This idea of persecuted Christians will always sell. But at the same time, there are also sectarian issues that there have been sectarian problems that have cropped up intermittently. There hasn't been anything like that within the last couple of months. But what you do have is, in general, I can tell you that in general, in Egyptian culture, Egypt has a 1,000-year-plus history of Muslims and Christians living together in perfect harmony, even to the point where Sharia law or Islamic law is actually specifically, says that specifically forbids any sort of attacks on Christians. That under Islamic law they are protected they should be protected by the state. I'm talking about the Christian community. So it's only recently, within the last couple of decades, specifically under Mubarak, that you started having serious sectarian outbreaks occurring. Now, what you have now is the phenomenon that you have now after the revolution is now that with the empowerment of the Salafists, who you never used to hear about before. They used to sort of keep their mouths closed. You just never heard much about the Salafists before the revolution. But since the revolution, they've become extremely vocal. They've got a number of satellite television channels now. And so what you do is you get these sort of high-profile Salafist preachers who will occasionally come out and make very provocative comments about Christians. Say things like, "Oh, a good Muslim shouldn't congratulate a Christian on the occasion of Christmas," and just sort of silly things like this that really, all they do is sort of rile people up, and I have to wonder when I hear stuff like that. I have to wonder if some of these preachers aren't actually, aren't agents for some third party that are specifically trying to sow some kind of sectarian discord in a country where, like I said, the two communities have always gotten along and have always lived harmoniously for more than 1,000 years. This is a very weird phenomenon. I don't know is your question based on a particular incident? Has something happened recently that you've heard regarding Salafists and the Coptic Christians?
Nah, just, I'm a typical American, and the way I look at the old world and the way it's carved up by the former empires and by my own empire now, not that I have anything to do with it, but, the American one has a lot to do with dividing and conquering and sealing off factions. And, of course, the truth of the matter is that in the old world, people really do define their leadership in old tribal ways, much more than we do in America, even though, of course, we still have our problems with tribalism and racism and that kind of thing, too, of course. But it's not quite the same as over there. Like in the Iraq War, it wasn't all the Sunni people versus all the Shiite people, but it sure as hell was the Sunni leaders versus the Shiite leaders. You know what I mean?
Well, sure, but in the case of Iraq as well, I mean, it's noteworthy that, those two communities lived together for 1,000 years plus. They often intermarried. There was never any of the sort of carnage that you saw, all that sort of fighting, all that awful stuff you saw that started around 2006, if you remember that, the bombing.
Well, right, because the Americans invaded and overthrew the government, and then they declared majority rules. Well, majority doesn't rule the capital city, so civil war time.
Right, but again, it's a phenomenon that just simply didn't exist before the U.S. Before foreign troops came in and started messing.
Well, but I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, this is not a foreign invasion, but it is a revolution, and like you're saying, there are reports of now the Salafists are, seem to be trying to cause some discord, whatever. I just see like a news blackout on this. I don't get any information from the media about it, so I actually was. I was guessing that there's not really much of a problem and that you would probably, pour water on the hype, which is pretty much what you did, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And the Western media is very, very guilty of doing that. Definitely, there's been a lot of exaggeration and stuff. And I know the whole journalistic environment in Egypt, the media, for the most part, is quite anti-Islamist in general. I'm talking about the private media, which tends to be more liberal, it's often owned by wealthy businessmen and that sort of thing who are close to the former regime. So it's within their interest to play up that sort of thing, because what it does is, it basically puts the Islamists in a bad light. It portrays them to the rest of the world as being despotic or being discriminatory against Christians and that sort of thing. When, like I said, Egypt does not have a legacy of that sort of, if you look through history during the Ottoman period or even up to like the 1950s and 60s and 70s, there are no incidents of pogroms, against Christians and that sort of thing, even though they represent between 10 and 15% of the population of Egypt. This whole idea of Christian versus Muslim stuff, in Egypt at least is a very, very new thing. And what I think is it's always been used as a convenient tool. It was certainly used as a convenient tool by the Mubarak regime, which could, in the event of some kind of clash or fighting between Muslims and Christians, could step in and pose itself to the West, pose itself to everybody as a protector of the Christians, and say, look, we have to renew the emergency law for another 2 years, because without these draconian measures, the Islamists are all going to attack the Christians and burn their churches and that sort of thing. So it was a clever, it was a convenient card to play. This looming threat, this phantom menace of Islam, of Muslim on Christian violence, right, that could be pulled up whenever they wanted to justify, like I said, the emergency law, masalan, or or any sort of draconian measure.
The $64,000 question is, how badly is the CIA trying to cozy up to and or co-opt the Muslim Brotherhood and their regime, or how closely are they working together already, or what's the state of that? Because of course the American government, it's not going to give up trying to have as much influence as possible. In fact, they're even selling now giving away a bunch of F-16s that are supposed to be a big part of a bribe that, even post-Mubarak, you guys are still with us, right? Kind of a thing. And I just imagine, without knowing, that there's got to be uncountable numbers of CIA agents running around, trying to control as much as they can, right?
Sure. Well, I would say that, I've always sort of had my suspicions about Brotherhood, and you have to, in the case of any sort of major organization or movement in the Middle East, you have to assume there have been at least attempts to infiltrate it by U.S. intelligence. But I have to say, what only looks increasingly like a counter-revolution here against the elected government heats up, I have to wonder. I mean, I'm starting to think that maybe the Brotherhood is totally legit, given the amount of energy and resources that are going into stabilizing the Morsi government right now. And I've said ever since the revolution, and the days following Mubarak's ouster, I remember saying to myself, that the powers that be in the West will absolutely never, given its incredible size and strategic importance, the powers that be in the West will never allow Egypt to go its own way. So hook or by crook, they're going to be in here trying to control, the direction of the country.
No question
about it. But again,
like
I said, the fact that this counter-revolution that we've seen over the last couple of days, and which you can actually date back to late November, right before the constitutional referendum, it seems to be so well directed and so well sort of funded and planned that it makes me think that maybe the Muslim Brotherhood is actually a legitimate representative of the people, and that powers that be are just trying to destabilize it. I mean,
yeah, it could be that's the CIA's allies, is that Egyptian deep state, the former Mubarak guys who are their old friends. Really, that would be as likely, at least, as them finding a way to make an alliance with the Brotherhood. Although, and I don't know near enough about this, but I know in Bob Dreyfus's book, there's a long history going way back about the CIA and the Brotherhood. They're not completely alien from each other, these groups.
Sure. It's not impossible. Also, Scott, I find that intelligence agencies also like to control both sides of a given
as many as they can. Yeah, maybe a lot more than both.
So, exactly. So you might have these guys funding the anti-Morsi counter-revolution that's going on right now, and they might also be deep into they might also have their tentacles into the Brotherhood itself, just so they can control all possible outcomes. They're going to end up on top of this. Is also a possibility, unfortunately.
Yep. All right. Well, and your phone's completely going out on us, unfortunately, as well. But we got every little bit of it but that last sentence. So thanks very much, Adam. It's great to talk to you again, man.
Hey, talk again soon.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody, that is Adam Morrow. He's a reporter for Interpress Service. That's IPSnews.net. Man, you need some Liberty stickers for the back of your truck. At LibertyStickers.com, they've got great state hate, like Pearl Harbor was an inside job. The Democrats want your guns. U.S. Army, die for Israel. Police brutality, not just for black people anymore. and government school, why you and your kids are so stupid. Check out these and 1,000 other great ones at LibertyStickers.com. And of course, they'll take care of all your custom printing for your band or your business at TheBumperSticker.com. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey ladies, Scott Horton here. If you would like truly youthful, healthy, and healthy-looking skin, there is one very special company you need to visit, Dagny & Lane at DagnyandLane.com. Dagny & Lane has revolutionized the industry with a full line of products made from organic and all-natural ingredients that penetrate deeply with nutrient-rich ionic minerals and antioxidants for healthy and beautiful skin. That's Dagny & Lane at DagnyandLane.com. And for a limited time, add promo code SCOTT15 at checkout for a 15% discount. The Emergency Committee for Israel, Brookings, Heritage, AIPAC, WINEP, JINSA, PNAC, CNAS, the AEI, FPI, CFR, and CSP. It sure does seem sometimes like the war party's got the foreign policy debate in D.C. all locked up. But not quite. Check out the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. They put America first, opposing our government's world empire, and especially their Middle Eastern madness. That's the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. Hey y'all, Scott here. First of all, thanks to the show's sponsors and donors who make it possible for me to do this. Secondly, I need more sponsors and more donors if the show is to continue. ScottHorton.org/donate has all the links to use PayPal, Give.org, Google Wallet, WePay.com, and even Bitcoins to make a donation in any amount. You can also sign up for monthly donations of small and medium-sized amounts through PayPal and Give.org. Again, that's ScottHorton.org/donate for all the links. To advertise on the site or the show, email me, Scott@ScottHorton.org. And thanks. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out WallStreetWindow.com. It's a financial blog written by former hedge fund manager Mike Swanson, who's investing in commodities, mining stocks, and European markets. Wall Street Window is unique in that Mike shows people what he's really investing in and updates you when he buys or sells in his main account. Mike thinks his positions are going to go up because of all the money the Federal Reserve is printing to finance the deficit. See what happens at WallStreetWindow.com. And Mike's got a great new book coming out, so also keep your eye on writer MichaelSwanson.com for more details.